Next up is Seth Chromick. He's speaking about the past, present, and future of advanced attacks.
Hello? Squeaking. Man, there's a lot more people in here than I thought would be. This is the past, present, and future of advanced attacks. My name's Seth Chromick. Here we are, NOTACON 7. This is my 5th NOTACON, so rock on. Everyone made the smart choice to be here this weekend. So I work for Cincinnati Bell Technology Solutions. We have a bunch of customers, but the customer that I support is a very large customer with about 90,000 nodes online at any one time. They are pretty much all over the planet. And the good thing about working in an environment like that is they have everything and anything you can think of in production as far as OS or platform or technology. The bad part about that is that they have pretty much everything you can think of, OS and technology to support. So integration and communication between teams can be difficult at times. I'm not an expert at this, especially because it's not that it's new, but the work that we're doing, where I am and the customer that we're supporting, is pretty new. Obviously with Operation Aurora, APT has, you can't avoid that term now. A lot of people don't think APT is a real thing, or they think it's a marketing term. It is most definitely not, but a lot of the information you get out there and a lot of things people encounter who are doing network security are now saying that things are APT or advanced persistent threats when they actually are not. So I'm going to kind of go over what APT actually is, what it isn't. I don't really care what you call it. I mean, APT is the term that you get beat over the head with now. At the DoD level, that's not what it's called anymore because you can Google for the word APT and get results. So what it's actually called now, you can't just Google for. That's the whole point. So hence the marketing term of APT. There's a lot of different different phrases for it: advanced persistent threats, next generation threats. The guys over at Cassandra Security call it subversive multi-vector threats. Again, a lot of that is more marketing. It's all the same thing. It's all bad. And then you get into the space of, information, cyber, network security, warfare, and all those terminologies that get thrown around. It's really espionage. I don't consider APT to be acts of war. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm just going to call it APT. So, advanced persistent threats. What do we really mean? If it's not a marketing term, then what do we mean by advanced persistent threats? And how does it, how do we differentiate what is APT versus what's an annoyance or a security risk but not associated with APT? Start with advanced. The actors that are involved in APT attacks usually work in teams. There's a lot of coordination between the teams. There are entities with specific roles doing very specific things who hand off the work to the next team when their job is done. They do reconnaissance, they do custom development, infiltration and persistence, and then obviously why get into a network? Well, you want to remove data from that network. That's the end goal. Persistent, I mean, unlike your script kiddie that's hopping around the net running Metasploit, putting his name on somebody's website and then moving on to the next subnet, the whole reason these people are doing what they're doing is they don't want to be found, they don't want to be seen, they are not doing they're not spraying every tool out there that they can at any IP address, trying to just get into any system that just so happens to be vulnerable. the reconnaissance part of this is very large. They will see who you are, what you're running, who you're associated with, what they're running, you know, who works there, where have they worked before. Social engineering is a huge part of this, comes into play a lot. And they're very patient. There are instances of actors that will take weeks or months to get into your network, and they may pop themselves into your network, and then they don't do anything for 6 months. And then they show up again, then they'll come back. It's a very different mindset than I'm gonna go out and run Metasploit, I'm gonna tag a bunch of websites and, you know, go get a pizza. There's a big difference between these tactics. And obviously the threat is, you know, what someone who would be classified as APT is going after, you know, the people that have the good stuff. So military, industrial, infrastructure, government, financial. You read a lot about like credit card scams. You read a lot about, you know, people that are dumping customer databases from credit card companies. Though the nature of those attacks has a very similar mindset, that's not necessarily what is considered APT by like the government or by law enforcement. It's still very bad. There are a lot of very smart people out there doing very bad things. But in general, this is really more infrastructure and military type attacks. So moving along. I figured Vanilla Ice was an awesome barometer for the decades as we move through them. I want to go back through sort of the dark ages of some of this. And we'll start in the 90s because that's really when most of the information that I could find that was available publicly really starts to enumerate. So, and even in the early 90s, there's obviously a huge, you know, dependency on you know, the internet and on technology for our government and our military. But the nature of the attacks, a lot of these early events were casual, you know, they were kids, they were teenagers, they were dialing into systems. I've seen people walking around the con who I'm 99% sure have never dialed into the internet before, which is fucking with my head so much right now. So anyway, moving along. So we'll get right into it. Datastream Cowboy and Coogee. 16-year-old kid, he was from Wales, dialing into research centers. He hopped along through NASA, Wright Pat down in Beaver Creek, south of us. A bunch of other targets. I don't like give an entire attack diagram of what they did. I'm just summarizing here for effect. But it was completely recreational. It was, you know, the bored kid with a, you know, computer and a modem dialing into these systems. The reason that this is important, though, is because when we finally caught wind of this, their next step was trying to get into these servers in North Korea. And at the time there was, well, not that there isn't political tension with North Korea right now, but they were unsuccessfully beating the hell out of these North Korean servers, and obviously everyone at the DoD was flipping out because those attacks were coming from, apparently NASA twice, I don't proofread very well, but they were coming from US systems. So it was really a kid sitting in Wales, you know, bored, and he almost caused an international incident. Eventually they found these guys, they arrested him. Apparently this guy cried when the cops showed up. Now we start to get a little bit more serious. This is Operation Solar Sunrise. And this guy is actually back in the news as of a couple months ago. But for this particular incident, the analyzer was working with a couple other people, coordinating, and bouncing around amongst these servers. But the difference this time is he was really pulling down information. He was pulling down creds. He was pulling down email. He had troop arrangement patterns on his hard drive when they eventually caught him. He was getting stuff that shouldn't be out there in the public space. The claim is that none of it's classified. Who really knows, you know? But the coincidental thing is that the year before, in 1997, the government did an internal audit of their own systems called Eligible Receiver, which is the guy down here at the bottom. And Eligible Receiver was, you know, an internal, you know, red team, blue team type test of their network. Found all kinds of vulnerabilities. Everything was very well documented, like this isn't patched, and this isn't patched, and this is out of date, and this is open to the net. So they basically had a book that said, here's everything that's wrong, and they're like, awesome, and then they put that on a shelf, and then they went home, and then these guys broke in using the very methods they had already documented. So now it starts to get a little bit more serious because this wasn't necessarily recreational. This wasn't, oops, I got into your network, I'm sorry. This was, I really want in your network and I want data that's off of there. And like I said, a couple months ago, he got arrested in Canada for some sort of banking or credit card scam. So he's still active. And when he got arrested in 1998, he was in jail for about 6 months and then they let him go. And in some ways, he was considered a hero amongst the people that he was working with. Now it starts to get more serious. There's not a whole lot of information about this out in the public space. I don't know anything about it in the classified space either, so please don't like mug me and steal my laptop or something, because there's just Mad Men season 2 on there. But like, this is important because this is another country trying to get into our networks to steal data and siphon it back. And this wasn't a handful of kids talking on IRC. The information that's available points back to this was state-sponsored. This was, you know, directed at us trying to get our information off the networks. There's a bunch of official reports out there. A guy named James Adams pulled this quote out of an address he gave to the Senate. And starting to get into the mindset of APT, you start thinking, oh, well, I've got antivirus on my network. I've got an IPS, I've got IDS, you know, I've got log aggregation. Who cares? No one's getting in. Well, the mindset is that that's adorable, but what the change here is that they started changing their tactics to work within the confines of the security that had been set up. So instead of just randomly trying to, you know, spray the hash, pop something, boom, we're in, this was adjusting to changes that our side was making. So it, you know, the proverbial cat and mouse mentality starts prevailing here. So that's the end of 1999. And here we're on a couple of people just came into the room. I'm using Vanilla Ice to take us through this journey of advanced attacks. He keeps redefining himself, and APT keeps redefining itself, so it's a perfect barometer. So, I mean, that looks pretty modern. Somebody pirated Photoshop and made that, so. Here's something else that there's not a lot of information about. Titan Rain. There's not a lot of info out in the public space about this, but this is another example of adjusting tactics and taking an existing piece of code, this MyFip worm, which was known, was available, you know, out in the public. It had been examined. They had taken this worm and either reverse engineered it or patched it, and you know, to do what they wanted to, you know, what they wanted to do with it, their own payload. They had modified it to specifically look for, you know, Word and PDF and access files for exfiltration. The guy that discovered this wasn't, he was a researcher and was actually fired for discovering it because he was working with the FBI to help them do things that the FBI can't do legally on their own as a law enforcement entity. So most of the details about it are classified. There's a whole list of info if you go out there and Google, but again, I'm not gonna just copy and paste Google entries. But so Titan Rain is important because it's a modern example of taking an existing tool and modifying it, repacking it, and using it, for your own ends. Here's another one where there's not a lot of info, and as you can see, we start getting more recent, less and less info starts coming out about this, because at this point we are miles and miles away of the kids accidentally dialing into a network. This is important because phishing, spear phishing starts coming into play here very heavily. And even though spam emails and phishing type emails go way back, this is a sea change in the majority of the tactics. And in this example, there's a Trojan called Poison Ivy. It's a remote control tool with persistence mechanisms. You can get it from freaking anywhere. It even has a wizard to build your own installer and everything, and an SDK and a support form. But at the time, it was not known and involved in this incident. And obviously, the people that were targeted were, everyone we've seen before. And on and on and on and on and on. Each of these is well, this is a repeat of that previous slide. I was drinking Captain Morgan and working on this earlier, but these are all individual incidents, and there's more that, it's kind of irrelevant to list every single one. But spear phishing is a huge tactic, and we're gonna go through some of the tactics in the next couple slides here. But this just increased and increased and increased. So, no longer the casual hacker. And of course, if you're working in a corporate environment and you've got a firewall and you look at your logs, I mean, you're probably deflecting thousands of God only knows what all the time. This is the kind of stuff where it's coordinated, it's custom, it's team-based, it's reacting off of reconnaissance by the groups that participate in APT. This has been, again, this is another one where there's so much info out there. GhostNet, some private researchers came across this Trojan and some Trojan traffic. This actually affected a lot more than just US systems. There were embassies involved, there were foreign ministries involved, a NATO computer was involved. There's a million reports out there about this. It's very complicated, but it's another example of a custom system, and traffic was eventually traced back to where. So, and now, my most favorite thing that happened a couple months ago is Operation Aurora. I don't give a shit about Operation Aurora because it's only a big deal because it happened to Google. I've just shown you this has been going on for like 20 years. So this isn't new, but to the media, and the term advanced persistent threat was pushed out into the mainstream, was pushed out into the public mindset. And what is APT? Why is it different than a worm? Or, oh my God, I've got a fake antivirus program on my computer, that must be APT. For people who actually do research in this field, that's not APT. But so it's been, it's important because it's brought that term out, out from the shadows, into the light. And this investigation's still going on. I mean, really recently, some companies published a report that said, everything we just told you was wrong, sorry about that. And there's a specific company that's actually working on this with Google who actually knows what's going on, and they've said almost nothing about it. But every other vendor on the freaking planet is like we're involved with APT too. You know, we will protect you from APT. So you're getting into that that marketing term. So it's important, but it's Google. It's not that big of a deal. You know, and it's another example of a giant company running Internet Explorer 6. So you think, I mean, you think like, oh God, you know, like a Fortune 100 company, they have millions of dollars of IPS and IDS and infrastructure, and they must be impenetrable. But for anyone not high, they know that that is not true. Especially when you get into an organization that large, you know, you're absorbing other companies and other systems. You're rolling out, you know, test platforms of something. I mean, you get into a mixed environment, your attack surface is just endless, and they know that. And here we are, at Operation Aurora. So I mean, Internet Explorer 6, really? Google? Say what? So I've rambled now for a while. So what am I trying to say here? You know, what is the threat that we're trying to understand? You know, worms are bad, viruses are bad, spam emails are bad, fake antivirus programs are bad. But the difference here is that APT is not something you click and walk away from, and you hope you have a new botnet that you've built. You know, it's driven by humans. It's sponsored by humans. There's a lot of work that goes into it. It's not just mindless, propagation of some piece of software. And obviously, like in any organization that has sensitive data, I mean, any change in the integrity of your network is bad. I'm not saying like completely dismiss viruses and everything, because that stuff's bad. That costs money. That costs time. But a lot of people don't see they think I have an intrusion detection system that I paid $1 bajillion for. So who cares about this? But we'll start going through this a little bit more. If you have any questions, I'm sorry, like I'm nervous and I just talk. So is there any questions so far? Okay, so okay, so you get it, the threat is real. Ooh. For anybody in this room that is a network administrator, you stare at firewalls all day, you do reverse engineering or malware research. There is some group of people somewhere else who are doing the exact opposite of what you are trying to do all day. You're trying to build the best firewall rule set man has ever seen. And there's somebody else out there who's getting paid, or maybe forced, to undo your work. And most of the time you're asleep while they're awake. So that doesn't help. When you're doing incident response, you get phone calls at silly times and get asked to do silly things under certain situations. So, and in some countries, there is a real subculture of hackers, where there are people who are in some ways are famous for it. They are famous for breaking into systems that are under our control. There are governments that turn a blind eye to that kind of activity. Now, if you hack their shit, they're going to be really, really mad. But if you go outside the network, that's cool, do whatever you want. And so nationalism, and obviously, tense times with multiple wars and differing groups. So there's, lots of people do feel, in some ways, it's a religious obligation. So the mindset is different. But not all APT is guys in a room, chained to their desk, being forced by a government to do this. In the same way that people in this room have done contract work before. You go on to any number of, I need someone, I'll pay somebody $50 to build a website for me. Well, there are people like that who are literally like a hacker for hire or, a professional organization. So for, security consulting companies like Mandiant who are here in the States, there's the inverse of that in other places too. It's not just all government going up against government. And that's something that Aurora has really screwed up, and people covering Aurora, because they think that, because it's APT, that means it's a government versus government thing, and that's definitely not true. So, reconnaissance is obviously the hardest thing to monitor, because if you're internet facing, pretty much anybody can knock on your door, so to speak. But, and I went over this a little earlier, they'll harvest your website for all the media they can get. They'll enumerate names, they look for email addresses. And a lot of this reconnaissance leads up to the next step, which is trying to get into your network. Guess what? It's 2010. Don't click on fucking attachments from people you don't know. What the hell is wrong with you people? And some of what has been seen is, you've got a friend at an industry partner, another company, and they're emailing you from, their first name dot their last name at company.com. And that goes on. And then suddenly you get an email from, first name dot company at some other website. And there's a PDF attached that says, salary listing or job offer, or something like that, something juicy, and you open it, and now you have a Trojan, and you're stupid. So this happens all the time. And this is an APT, obviously. Phishing, spear phishing isn't just an APT thing. There are, in financial crimes and banks that have been broken into, this kind of targeted spear, or targeted like whale phishing. But the difference here is that it's not just like, hi, I'm a Nigerian prince, and give me your bank account number. It looks like it's coming from somebody you know, because the APT guys know who you're emailing. And that, hey, I wanted to send you this report from this meeting you were in last week. Hey, or, I saw you, you flew to Denver. Here's some Denver vacation photos. It can get eerily specific in some cases. And it's not just malicious PDFs. I don't know if anybody saw Martin Jack's dual course talk before, but that was awesome. So, little man hiding back there. There he is. He's a little mustache Satan, so it's my little nickname for him. No, but his talk was important because, obviously PDFs are the platform of choice for everybody. Not just APT, but it's freaking Swiss cheese right now. But in addition to PDFs, there are plenty of other exploitable platforms. I don't know. I would hope people in here keep up with the talks that happen at Black Hat, but I've been reading more and more about bytecode-based rootkits that exist in the Java VM, rootkits that exist in the Flash VM. Things that there are no scanners for. You have a vulnerable Flash applet, you pop that, you install essentially a rootkit by definition into the Flash component, and nothing will detect that. A lot of that's still theory, but we're talking about the future of advanced persistent threats and future threats. PDFs are bad. That sort of exploitable document is growing in interest to pretty much everybody. But there's good old-fashioned SQL injection. Just exploiting unpatched systems, or you've got a really stupid password, or hacking a normal, probably highly trafficked website, whatevernews.com, and that people are going to go there from a certain company, but you've installed your own drive-by downloader in that, your own browser-based exploit. That's possible too. And in APT, again, it's not about smashing all the stacks that you can find. because those are noisy, and your intrusion detection and your antivirus are going to pick up on that really fast. Well, some of them. Some don't, and then you wonder why you give them all that money. So malicious PDFs, the droppers in the PDFs, it's not uncommon for the persistence malware to get pulled in through the web or dropped on the machine and then eventually beacon out. Embedding executables and GIFs and JPEGs, because that always goes through your proxy, is so easy to do. And nobody looks at any of that information going through the proxy. No one does that. So I mean, that's very common. And there are scanners and there's tools that are starting to pick up on that. But it's another example of something where, your antivirus program isn't looking at the GIF files coming through your proxy for badness. It's like, oh, that's an image file, right on your hard drive. And probably one of the most interesting things is, with a lot of old school command and control traffic, it goes out to an IRC channel. It's very common in botnets. But, not many people let IRC through their proxy, especially like in a larger organization. So they have to adapt to your firewall rules that you've spent, all week writing, and all the policies you implement in your various tools. So what do? Well, they go out and own websites. They tell the malware, go out to these websites and just download arbitrary pages. And in those pages are the C2 traffic that's actually embedded in the website in HTML comments, and it's like encoded in various ways. Sometimes it's actually encrypted, sometimes it's just encoded. The APT guys get lazy too, which I'll show you in a couple slides from now. But they also will do just querying out with specially crafted URLs using a similar technique to like HTML comments. Or instant messenger programs. The backdoor gets installed on your system, and then it connects to, insert an instant messaging program client here, either by running that in the background in an invisible way or just hard-coded in. And you're going through your logs and you see a connection to AOL Instant Messenger, and you don't think about it because, oh, it's just AIM, whatever. Another misconception is, the goal of APT is not to be found. So they're not trying to exploit everything they can. They're not trying to do super noisy things on the host that they're infecting. So there's a blend of custom tools, but they also use things that come with Windows or maybe are in your core environment. Your software packaging tools, things like WinRAR or MakeCab, or just running NetView and seeing what that outputs. That's behavior that you can see in an attack that's APT based, and you would look at that and never really think about it, and most people don't. So the mindset is that they're trying to use what you have already against you to the best of their ability, because you wouldn't think your normal mindset for like being hacked is some super 0 day or something like that. But it's really the inverse thinking. And then, out of any piece of any malware on the planet, I'll give you a little nugget of information here. SVC host is probably one of the most common names for APT malware. So if you see SVC host running out of a directory that isn't system32, that is very bad. But it's also, process injection and doing registry auto runs is really, that's common to pretty much all malware. But process injection, especially because Windows XP just pretty much lets you do whatever you want, that is not uncommon. So, fuck. So, we've spent all this money on all our tools, and here we are. So LOL APT, APT LOL. These guys are not super elite. They're just persistent. They don't always do everything right or well, and during investigations, they misspell stuff a lot because they don't speak English. They'll have executables that are, you'll do a directory listing and you'll see a listing of DLLs or executables, and like the .exe name and like the meta info that gets dumped out about it, like copyright, whatever, Microsoft, it'll be like copyright 1901 Microsoft. And, sometimes you wonder. During investigations, I've seen instances where they can't remember simple Windows commands, so they're running like, / to get more information about a tool. And in some investigations, I've seen they try to mimic your host naming scheme, but not very well, and it'll stick out if you have like certain hosts with certain names exist in certain geographical regions or whatever. So again, they're not, they do stuff wrong too. I guess it's not super funny, but they are just people at the end of the day. So what are they trying to take? Well, it really depends on, yeah.
So basically, in your previous slide, what you're trying to say was basically like the advanced disadvanced and not so advanced stuff are all.
Well, just like with Aurora, the conception is that these guys are, if you've made the mistake of like seeing the movie Swordfish and things like that, the tactics are different, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything they do is super advanced. There's definitely instances of 0 days, 0 day attacks that they held on to for their own purposes. But there are times where they really screw stuff up because they're lazy or they're running late for something else, or they're just people. So unfortunately, sometimes they're better than that, and it keeps me employed. Internet Explorer 6 will keep me employed for the rest of my freaking life. So. So what are they stealing? Well, if they're in there for reconnaissance, pretty much anything that would have value to them, accounts and credentials, emails, your network map. They really want to know, what's connected to what, who works on what systems, who can get to where using what accounts. And again, some of this is, very specific to the network that you're responsible for. So. I can really only generalize, and I definitely can't talk, specifics, but, they want to know as much about you as they can, because again, it's not a smash and grab. It's I want to stay on your network and steal as much as I can for as long as I can. Again, not doing anything fancy, WinRAR, cabs, using images, sometimes just putting stuff in text files and using FTP. In more advanced cases, there can be fancier instances where on one end you've got a database server that's web-facing or eventually web-facing, and that's where they send their data. And another team comes in, aggregates your database servers, which has all your juicy info on it, and steals it out of there. Again, that's another instance of traffic that might be normal in your environment if you've got a bunch of database servers and you see, oh, just data transfer, and you don't even think about it. So we've talked about all your fancy tools, compliance, none of that matters. People save logs and then don't look at them and make assumptions about what's normal traffic and what isn't. If they've gotten onto your domain controller and they've dumped all your passwords and then they know what scripts connect to what machines using what credentials, then that's what they're going to do too, and you'll probably not pick up on it. So a lot of this is really, thinking outside the box, I guess. And a lot of people don't look at their logs. They just don't. They keep them, they put them somewhere, they roll over, and they never look at them again. And they make massive assumptions about the traffic that's moving around on their network. When, you know, proxy traffic can be a nightmare to go through. You know, Splunk or some sort of custom scripts. You know, there's an instance of, you know, there was an instance where I had about 80 gigs of proxy traffic to parse. Like 8 megs of raw ASCII text is a lot. But I've been in environments where there's 80 gigs of text to look. Yeah. 1 day of traffic generating 80 gigs. So there's some unique challenges, and most people don't want to look through like 8 lines of proxy traffic, and they know that, and that's awesome to them because that's something that you think is normal that is actually not normal. And how do you find beacons? How do you find malware that's designed to say, hey, I'm here in that much traffic? So you have to engineer unique solutions. You have to think past hanging off of a collection of tools. So, and somebody's playing Pac-Man or something. Hearing somebody's phone or something.
It's not mine.
The future. I don't get this. I don't. So it's hard to say. I mean, the threats and tools are going to change as you change your environment and you change what you're implementing and what you're protecting. In APT, you don't see a lot of rootkits because rootkits can totally screw up your machine, and then suddenly you're out in the open. It doesn't mean that rootkit type technology or rootkit malware doesn't get added into the mix, but it's actually not that common because it can be so tricky. When you start getting into kernel land, you can really screw stuff up, and that's not what you want to do. You don't want to be found. Network devices. I did a talk a couple months ago for the InfraGard reverse engineering meetup group, and I said, wouldn't it be weird if there was a botnet that just ran on routers, and then like 2 days later, the Chuck Norris botnet came out, and it attacked specific routers with running a specific type of firmware. And you don't see, and by network devices, I mean exploits that target that network hardware. And what about phones? BlackBerry, your iPhone, your Droid phone. I mean, I don't see much in that space, but it's a possibility. But the tactics and the point of it, has pretty much stayed the same. So keep opening up your links and your attachments from people that you don't know, and I will keep collecting paychecks. So thanks for letting me ramble at you. That's